My wife cheated for months with a man from work. I caught her in a hotel, and when I confronted her, she begged to stay, but I never imagined I'd be writing something like this. My name is Jeff, and my wife, Katie, and I have been married for 6 years. We live in a small town, have a cozy little home, and until recently, I thought we had a pretty solid marriage. We've got a 3-year-old daughter, Emma, who lights up my world. Life was good, or so I thought. About 6 months ago, I started noticing some things. You know how it is when you live with someone for a long time. You get used to their habits, their rhythms. Well, Katie's rhythm was off. She's always been super organized, always on top of things. But suddenly, she was distracted, forgetting small stuff like picking up groceries or calling me back. She'd brush it off, laughing like it was no big deal. "Just busy, babe," she'd say. "Work's been crazy." At first, I didn't think much of it. She's a realtor, and things can get hectic with house showings, paperwork, and client meetings. But then, there were the late-night texts. At first, she'd casually check her phone, smile at something, and toss it back on the counter. No big deal. Then, her phone started coming with her everywhere. Bathroom? Yep. Bedroom? Always. And she started locking it, which was new. Katie's never been the type to keep secrets. One night, as we were lying in bed, I glanced over and saw her texting. When I asked who it was, she said, "Oh, just work stuff." But she didn't show me the screen, and she put the phone face down on the nightstand. That was the first time I felt the sinking feeling in my gut that maybe something was wrong. But I shook it off. I didn't want to be the paranoid husband, right? It happened by accident. One random Saturday morning, I was in the kitchen making breakfast for Emma. Katie had already left the house, saying she had an early meeting with a client. Normally, I'd be too busy chasing Emma around to think twice about it, but for some reason, I felt uneasy that morning. While I was pouring Emma's cereal, my phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at it out of habit, expecting a spam text or maybe a message from my brother. But instead, it was a notification from our shared iCloud account. Katie and I had always shared our calendars to make life easier, but it looked like she'd accidentally synced a file to our shared photo album instead. Curious, I opened it. My heart stopped. The image that popped up wasn't a real estate listing or a cute photo of Emma. It was a picture of Katie, but she wasn't alone. She was sitting at a restaurant, leaning into some guy, his arm casually draped around her shoulders. The angle made it clear it wasn't just a friendly moment. She was smiling, laughing like she didn't have a care in the world, like this was some kind of secret date. At first, I stared at the picture, not fully processing what I was seeing. Maybe it was an old photo, I thought. Maybe this was a client or a friend or something completely innocent that I was misunderstanding. But when I checked the timestamp on the photo, my stomach dropped. It was from last night. Katie had told me she had a late house showing and would be back late. I believed her without question, but this wasn't work. This was something else entirely. I clicked on the album to see if there were more photos. My hands were shaking as I scrolled. There were a few pictures from earlier in the week, seemingly normal. Houses, work stuff, a photo of Emma playing in the yard. But then another one popped up from that same night. Katie and the guy again. This time, they were walking out of the restaurant together, looking way too comfortable. The weight of it hit me all at once. This wasn't just my imagination. This was real. I sat there, frozen, staring at the screen. I must have replayed the moment in my head 100 times, convincing myself that I was misunderstanding, that this couldn't be real. But it was real. The timestamp didn't lie. Katie had been with someone else last night, while I sat at home, oblivious. My mind started racing. Who was this guy? How long had this been going on? Was it a one-time thing, or had it been happening for months? All the late meetings, the missed dinners. Was this what she'd been hiding? I felt a knot tightening in my chest, anger bubbling up, but at the same time, an overwhelming sense of panic. I didn't know what to do. Should I call her? Confront her right away? Or should I wait? Gather more information? My hands were shaking so badly, I had to set the phone down. I looked over at Emma, who was happily eating her cereal, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. How could Katie do this to us? How could she risk everything we'd built together for some guy I didn't even know? I wanted to scream, to break something, but I had to hold it together, not in front of Emma. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down, but the questions kept swirling in my mind. What if it wasn't just last night? What if this had been going on for months? Years even? I needed answers, but more than anything, I needed to understand why. Why would she do this? We had a life, a family, a daughter who adored her. What was worth risking all of that? After that initial wave of panic, a strange calm settled over me. My mind switched from pure emotion to calculation. If I confronted her right away, she could easily deny everything. Maybe she'd say it was innocent, just a business dinner that got taken out of context. I didn't know for sure yet, and without the full story, I wouldn't have any real power in that conversation. I needed more proof. I took a deep breath and opened the iCloud album again. This time, I went deeper. Katie had synced a lot of her photos to the cloud over the past few weeks. There were pictures of houses, of course, but I found more and more that didn't make sense. Selfies at strange hours, outfits I'd never seen her wear at home, and photos of drinks at fancy restaurants I didn't remember us going to. Then, I found it, a text message thread. Somehow, a screenshot of her conversation had been uploaded to the cloud. At first, it looked innocent enough, just text between her and a number not saved in her contacts. But the tone was too casual, too familiar. And then I saw the words that turned my stomach. Last night was amazing. I can't wait to see you again. I couldn't breathe. It felt like someone had punched me in the gut. This wasn't just a casual dinner. This was a full-blown affair. I clicked through more of the messages, the words getting worse with each new line. Flirting, inside jokes, plans to meet up again. It wasn't just last night. This had been going on for weeks, maybe months. I could feel my pulse in my ears, my vision blurring with rage. There it was, the cold, hard proof. She'd been lying to me, sleeping with someone else, and acting like everything was normal. I sat there, my phone burning in my hand as I stared at those messages. The calm I'd felt earlier began to slip away, replaced by a tidal wave of anger and betrayal. How long had this been going on? Was everything between us just a lie? Every kiss, every "I love you." Was it all just a front while she was sneaking around with this guy? I wanted to call her right then, demand an explanation, scream at her, but I stopped myself. If I blew up now, she could twist the situation, deny everything, and I'd be left with nothing but suspicions. No, I needed to stay one step ahead. I needed to confront her when she couldn't weasel out of it. But how? Should I catch her in the act? Should I wait until she came home and pretend everything was normal, just to see what she'd say? The thought of playing dumb made my stomach churn. But I realized I had to be smart about this. I needed to plan the confrontation carefully. I decided to gather as much information as I could without tipping her off. The messages had given me more than enough to go on, but I wanted to know more. Who this guy was, how long this had been going on, and if there were other lies she'd been hiding. I scrolled back through her messages, noting any details that seemed relevant. They had plans to meet again next Friday. That was something I could use. If I played my cards right, I could catch her in the act and make sure there was no way for her to deny it. The thought of setting her up felt dirty, but she'd forced me into this. If she was willing to lie to my face and betray everything we'd built, then I had every right to uncover the truth. The days leading up to Friday felt like the longest of my life. Every time Katie smiled at me or kissed me goodbye in the morning, it was like a knife twisting deeper into my gut. I had to force myself to act normal, pretend that everything was fine, when in reality, I was barely holding it together. I studied her every move, every word, wondering if she could tell that I knew. But Katie was either an incredible actress, or she had no idea her double life was about to unravel. Each night she came home from work, I watched her closely, trying to catch any signs of guilt, any slip-ups, but she carried on like nothing was wrong. Emma, bless her, had no idea what was happening. I played with her, read her bedtime stories, trying to keep everything normal for her sake. But in the back of my mind, all I could think about was that coming Friday, when Katie would meet him again. That week, I did my research. I went through every photo, every message I could access, piecing together bits of information. The guy's name was Jason. He worked in real estate too, but in another city a couple of hours away. They'd met at some conference months ago, and it seemed like that's when things had started. By Thursday night, I had a clear picture of how deep this went. This wasn't just some fling. It had been going on for months. While I had been working late, taking care of Emma and trusting my wife, she had been sneaking around with him. The anger inside me was bubbling up, harder to contain with each passing hour. I knew Friday would be the day. They had planned to meet at a hotel in the city. Katie thought I'd be working late, as usual. But I had a different plan. I was going to follow her, confront her, and let her see that I knew everything. Friday finally arrived, and I felt like I was on autopilot. Every minute dragged, my mind racing through 100 different scenarios of how the day would end. I wasn't sure if I'd explode in anger or break down in tears when the moment came. All I knew was that today, everything would come to light. Katie was her usual self that morning, sipping coffee in the kitchen, dressed a little more carefully than usual, but nothing overly suspicious. "I've got a late meeting," she said as she grabbed her bag. "I'll be home by 9, maybe 10, depending on how things go." I smiled, forcing the words out. "No problem. I'll get Emma to bed and maybe catch the game." She leaned in, kissed me on the cheek, and walked out the door like it was any other day. Except this wasn't just another day. I watched her leave, that familiar knot tightening in my stomach, knowing exactly where she was really going. Once she was out of sight, I grabbed my phone and checked the messages. Sure enough, she had texted Jason. "I'll see you at 7. Can't wait." I waited a few minutes, my heart pounding in my chest, before I grabbed my keys and left the house. Emma was spending the afternoon with her grandparents, so I had time to follow Katie without worrying about her being around. I knew the hotel they were meeting at. It wasn't far from the city center, about a 20-minute drive. I made sure to keep a safe distance as I followed her car, praying she wouldn't notice me. My palms were slick with sweat, my mind racing with all the things I wanted to say when I finally confronted her. When she pulled in the hotel parking lot, I stayed back, parking a block away. I watched as she got out of the car, checked her reflection in the mirror, and headed inside. She didn't look nervous at all, confident even. I waited a few more minutes, collecting myself. Then I got out and walked toward the hotel. My hands were shaking, but I was ready. This was it. I had no idea how this would play out, but there was no turning back now. As I approached the hotel entrance, I could feel my heart racing in my chest. I tried to steady my breathing, reminding myself why I was here. This was the moment I had dreaded and anticipated for days. I had no idea what I would say when I saw her, but I knew I couldn't let her get away with it any longer. I walked into the lobby, scanning the room quickly. Katie was nowhere to be seen. I approached the front desk, keeping my voice calm and casual. "Hey," I said, forcing a smile. My wife checked in earlier, but I forgot which room she booked. "Can you remind me?" The woman at the desk glanced at me, then back at her computer. "Name, Katie Johnson," I replied. The lie came easily. She typed for a moment, then nodded. "Room 215, she said, handing me a key card. "Enjoy your stay." I took the card, my stomach twisting with a sick feeling of disbelief. It had been that easy. With trembling hands, I made my way toward the elevator, each step feeling heavier than the last. The ride up was silent, the soft hum of the elevator doing nothing to drown out the noise in my head. My thoughts were chaotic. What would I say? Would I yell? Or would I fall apart? When the elevator doors opened, I stepped into the hallway, my feet feeling like lead. I found room 215 at the end of the corridor. I could hear muffled voices behind the door, faint but unmistakable. One of them was Katie. I stood there for a moment, staring at the door, my pulse pounding in my ears. This was it. This was where my marriage, my life as I knew it, would change forever. My hand hovered over the doorknob, hesitating. But then I swiped the key card and opened the door. The scene inside hit me like a punch to the gut. There they were, Katie and Jason, sitting on the edge of the bed. She was laughing, her head tilted back, completely at ease, like she was on some romantic getaway. They hadn't even noticed me yet. For a second, I stood frozen, the sight of them together more painful than I had imagined. This wasn't just about the physical betrayal. It was the ease, the comfort she had with him, the way she was with him that I hadn't seen in our marriage for so long. Finally, they turned and saw me. Katie's smile vanished, replaced by wide-eyed shock. "Jeff?" she stammered, scrambling to her feet. Jason just sat there, speechless, his face draining of color. I couldn't find the words at first, my throat tight with rage and heartbreak. But eventually they came out slow and heavy. "How long? Katie." Katie stood there, frozen, like a kid caught with her hand in the cookie jar. Jason, sitting on the bed, looked too stunned to even move. It felt like time had slowed down, like I was watching everything unfold from a distance, disconnected from my own body. "How long?" I asked again, my voice barely above a whisper, but sharp enough to cut through the silence. Katie blinked, finally snapping out of her daze. "Jeff, she started, but her voice wavered. "It's not what you think." I laughed, but it came out bitter, full of disbelief. "Not what I think. So, you're not sneaking around with this guy behind my back." I pointed at Jason, who looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. Katie's eyes welled up with tears, but I didn't care. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she stammered. "It was a mistake." "A mistake?" I echoed, my voice rising. "You don't accidentally meet someone in a hotel room." "How long?" "Katie, how long have you been lying to me?" She wiped at her eyes, her shoulders shaking. "A few months since that conference." The room felt like it was spinning. A few months? Every single day, every night we'd spent together, every kiss, every time she'd said, "I love you." It was all a lie. I shook my head, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. "We have a daughter, Katie, a family, and this is what you do. You throw it all away for him." Katie took a step toward me, her voice desperate. "Jeff, I'm so sorry. I never wanted this to happen." But I couldn't even look at her anymore. "It's too late for sorry." I stood there, staring at Katie, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. All the words I wanted to say were caught in my throat, tangled with anger, hurt, and disbelief. Katie, the woman I had trusted with my heart, the mother of our daughter, had been living a lie for months. Jason finally stood up, his hands half raised in some pathetic attempt to defuse the situation. "Look, man, I didn't. Just get out." I cut him off, my voice cold. I couldn't deal with him. I didn't care what his excuse was. He didn't even belong in this conversation. Jason hesitated for a second, but when I took a step toward him, he grabbed his jacket and bolted out the door without another word. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving just Katie and me, standing in the wreckage of our life together. Katie's tears were flowing freely now. She tried to come closer, but I took a step back, keeping my distance. "Jeff, please. I didn't want this to happen. I never meant to hurt you." I shook my head, my voice barely holding together. "You didn't mean to hurt me? Katie, you've been lying to me for months. This wasn't some one-time thing. This was a choice. Every single day, you chose to keep lying." She covered her face with her hands, sobbing, but all I felt was a growing numbness. The hurt, the betrayal. It was overwhelming, but I couldn't let her see how much it was destroying me inside. "Not now. I need to go." I said quietly, turning toward the door. I can't do this right now. Jeff, please, don't leave like this, she begged, her voice breaking. We can talk about it. We can fix this. But I couldn't look at her anymore. I couldn't stand to be in the same room with her. There's nothing left to fix, Katie, I said, my voice hollow. And with that, I walked out the door, letting it close behind me. I walked out of the hotel, my mind buzzing, heart pounding, but mostly I just felt empty. The world outside seemed too normal for what had just happened. People were walking by, cars honking in the distance, life continuing like it hadn't just been ripped apart. I got in my car, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at nothing, the events of the last few minutes replaying in my head over and over. Katie's tears, her apologies, the months of lies. It was all too much to process. I started the engine, but I didn't drive. I couldn't. My hands were trembling, and I felt like I was about to explode or collapse into tears. I took a few deep breaths, trying to calm myself down, but the anger wouldn't leave. I wasn't sure if I wanted to scream or break something. Maybe both. Everything felt unreal. I had known Katie for so long, trusted her completely, and now it was like I didn't know her at all. How could she do this? How could she look me in the eyes every day, kiss me, say she loved me, and still sneak off to meet him? It made me sick. Finally, I started driving. I didn't even know where I was going at first. I just drove, letting the roads blur together, trying to make sense of the mess my life had become. Home didn't feel like an option, not yet. Emma was at her grandparents' house, so at least I didn't have to worry about her seeing me like this. But the question hung heavy in the air. What now? What do you do when the life you built is crumbling? How do you move forward when the person you trusted most in the world betrays you like this? I had no answers, just the empty road ahead. After driving aimlessly for what felt like hours, I finally found myself parked outside a small, quiet park. I didn't even remember deciding to come here, but it was familiar. Somewhere I used to bring Emma when she was younger. It felt surreal now, like I was living in a different world, a different life. I turned off the engine and just sat there, staring out at the swings swaying gently in the breeze. This park used to be a place of happiness, where I'd chase Emma around while Katie watched laughing. And now, the very thought of her filled me with bitterness. How could everything change so fast? Pulling out my phone, I scrolled mindlessly through old photos. There were so many of Katie, her smiling, holding Emma, us on vacation. We looked so happy. It all seemed so real at the time. But now, every image felt like a lie. Like the woman in those photos wasn't the same one I had just left at that hotel. I couldn't avoid it anymore. This wasn't just some nightmare I could wake up from. My wife had betrayed me. My marriage was shattered. And no matter how much I wanted to turn back time, to go back to how things were before, there was no undoing what she'd done. Part of me wondered if I could forgive her, if somehow we could work through this, especially for Emma's sake. But the other part of me, the part that still burned with anger and pain, knew that wasn't possible. How could I ever trust her again? How could I look at her the same way, knowing she had been with someone else for months? The weight of it all was suffocating. I leaned back in the seat, closing my eyes, trying to shut out the chaos in my head. But no matter what, one thought kept coming back. What was I going to tell Emma? How could I explain this to her without shattering her world too? I wasn't ready for that conversation. Not yet. But I knew it was coming, and when it did, it would be the hardest thing I'd ever have to face. After sitting in the car for what felt like hours, I knew I couldn't avoid it any longer. I had to go home. I had to face the reality of what was waiting for me there. Katie, our broken marriage, and the questions I didn't have answers to. But most of all, I had to figure out how to protect Emma from all of this. I drove back slowly, trying to prepare myself for the conversation I knew was coming. My head was spinning with questions. Should I tell Emma the truth, or should I keep it from her? At least for now, until I had my emotions under control. The last thing I wanted was for her to see me like this, angry, hurt, lost. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same as always, but it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a place filled with lies, with memories that had been tainted. I sat there for a moment, taking a deep breath before heading inside. The house was quiet, too quiet. Katie wasn't home yet, and for a split second, I was relieved. I didn't think I could handle another confrontation right now. Emma's toys were scattered across the living room, and the sight of them brought a lump to my throat. She didn't deserve this. None of this was her fault. I called my in-laws to check on her. "Hey, how's Emma doing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "She's fine," her grandmother replied. "She's been playing all afternoon, no trouble at all." "Are you okay, Jeff?" I hesitated, not sure how to answer that. "Yeah, just had a long day. Can she stay with you for the night?" "I think it'd be best if I picked her up tomorrow." "Of course, Jeff. Take your time. We'll keep her busy." "Thanks," I muttered, hanging up the phone. I stared at it for a moment, grateful that Emma wouldn't be home tonight. I needed time to think, to figure out what to say and how to handle this. But I knew the clock was ticking. Eventually, Katie would come home. Eventually, we'd have to talk. And eventually, Emma would need answers. It was late when I heard the front door open. Katie walked in quietly, like she didn't want to make a sound. The tension hit me instantly, tightening in the air between us. I didn't get up. I didn't even look at her. I just sat at the kitchen table, staring at my hands, trying to figure out what to say. What was there left to say, really? "Jeff?" she called softly, her voice cautious, like she was testing the waters. I didn't answer right away, and she stepped closer, her footsteps slow, hesitant. She stood in the doorway, waiting. I could feel her eyes on me, full of guilt and uncertainty. After what felt like forever, I finally looked up. Her face was pale, eyes red from crying. I could tell she had been thinking about this moment all day, just like me. "We need to talk," I said, my voice flat, drained. She nodded and sat down across from me. For a while, neither of us said anything. I could tell she was waiting for me to start, but I didn't even know where to begin. The silence felt like a heavy weight pressing down on both of us. "I don't know how we got here, Katie," I finally said, my voice low. "I trusted you. I thought we had a good life together. And now, I don't even know who you are." Her eyes filled with tears again, but I didn't have the strength to comfort her. I was too angry, too hurt. "I'm sorry, Jeff," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I never wanted to hurt you. I don't even know how it happened. I was so stupid." I shook my head, the words doing nothing to ease the pain. "You didn't just mess up, Katie. This wasn't a one-time thing. You lied to me, over and over, for months. You made a choice. Every single day you made a choice to betray me." "I know," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "I know, and I hate myself for it. I didn't want this to happen. I don't know how I let it go this far." I stood up then, pacing the kitchen, my frustration boiling over. "And what about Emma? What are we supposed to tell her? She doesn't deserve this, Katie. She deserves better than this mess." Katie looked up, her face streaked with tears. "We don't have to tell her right away. Maybe we can figure something out, try to make this work. For her." I stopped in my tracks, looking at her in disbelief. "Make this work," I repeated, my voice shaking. "Katie, I don't even know if I can look at you without seeing the lies. How am I supposed to make this work when I don't even trust you anymore?" She didn't answer. She just sat there, her face crumpling as more tears fell. And for the first time, I realized how broken we really were. The life we had, the trust we shared, it was all gone. I sat back down at the kitchen table, the weight of it all finally hitting me. The reality was clear. There was no going back. Katie's tears, her regret, they couldn't change what had been done. And no matter how much I wanted to keep our family together for Emma's sake, The damage was too deep. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Katie," I said quietly, my voice barely holding steady. "I don't even know if I want to try. You broke something in me, in us, and I don't know if it can ever be fixed." Katie sobbed, her shoulders shaking, but I couldn't bring myself to feel anything anymore. The anger, the pain, it had all worn me down. I was exhausted, and the thought of fighting to save something so broken felt impossible. "I'll talk to Emma," I said, my voice flat. "We'll have to figure out how to do this, but I think we need to separate." The words hung in the air like a final blow. Katie's sobs quieted, her face pale and devastated. She didn't argue. Maybe she knew there was no point. Maybe she realized, like I had, that we couldn't just patch this up and pretend it never happened. I felt numb as I spoke. "I'll stay with her at your parents' for a few days while we figure things out. But I can't stay here, Katie. Not right now." She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I understand." The silence that followed was deafening. This was the end of something that had once meant everything to me. And now, sitting across from the woman I thought I'd spend my life with, I couldn't feel anything but emptiness. I stood up, walking toward the door, my footsteps heavy. Katie didn't stop me. She didn't say another word. And as I walked out of that house, I knew I wasn't just leaving a building. I was leaving behind a part of my life, a part of myself that I'd never get back. As I got into my car, I felt a strange sense of relief mixed with the overwhelming sadness. It was over. The lies, the betrayal, the constant questioning. I didn't know what the future held, but at least I knew one thing. I deserved better than this. And for Emma's sake, I would be better, no matter what it took.